Ladies and gentlemen, apes and sapiens alike, coming at you live from the heart of the Forbidden Zone. Put your hands together for Talk of the Planet of the Apes.
Thank you, everybody. I'm thinking the audience, that's clapping for us right now.
Got it.
Yes, thank you, one and all, and welcome to episode 0, the first ever episode, the 0th ever episode of Talk of the Planet of the Apes.
It's Patient Zero.
Patient 0.
Mm-hmm.
This is the introduction episode to whatever the hell this podcast is going to be. We didn't really figure it out. I figured we would figure out what this podcast is going to be throughout this first 0 episode,
Right.
this intro episode. It's not necessary to listen to, but it's good to have a 0 episode.
Yeah, because you get a little taste, and then, if you don't like the taste, then you can decide not to eat the full meal.
Exactly.
So
You could say, get the heck out of here. I don't want to listen to this. I'm going to unsubscribe, but I'm going to leave a 5-star review on your Apple Podcasts or podcast catcher of choice. But this is the first ever and only podcast to ever talk about Planet of the Apes.
obviously.
It's called Talk of the Planet of the Apes. It's a very creative name.
Mm-hmm.
No podcast has ever ventured into the idea of 2 people talking about movies. We're breaking new ground here, and we're here to talk about the greatest series of movies ever, a series entirely based around apes.
So your biography then.
Exactly. I love apes. Everything about apes. I live the ape lifestyle. If I could return evolutionary to any stage in human history, I would return to the time where we were apes and we got to live in the trees and touch each other's backs to find little bugs and eat the little bugs for nutrients.
If you think he's joking, he's not. I can confirm that he's not.
I love everything primate related. Everything. Monkeys, gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans. Unfortunately, there are no monkeys in these Planet of the Apes movies, but there's plenty of monkey business.
Yeah, that one time that you showed up to meet my parents in a loincloth, that was kind of weird.
I had to embrace my inner Tarzan. I already kind of look like Tarzan, so I had to go the full 9 miles. But yeah, essentially, this is going to be kind of a mini series where we cover one Planet of the Apes movie per episode. So this being the 0 episode means that we're not talking about one of the movies, but I did read the novel that the original movie is based on.
Who wrote the novel?
Pierre Boulle, the most French name that they could have picked for any young boy. They picked, and they named this boy, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But the whole premise of this podcast is, just the original Planet of the Apes movies, the first 5, right? There's 5 of them.
Mm-hmm.
We found a DVD box set at the thrift store for incredibly affordable. It was incredibly affordable. So it was a perfect opportunity to sit down and watch every single Planet of the Apes movie in a row.
What do we call this era, the first 5 movies of the Planet of the Apes?
I just say like the classic apes movies. All of these movies. No,
the
not
Simian Renaissance.
the Simian Renaissance. I'd say the Simian Renaissance is like the newer movies.
Okay.
Reviving the
Fair
franchise, introducing us to bigger ideas or whatever. But no, these funnily enough, the original Planet of the Apes movies only existed for about like a 5-year, 6-year span.
Mm-hmm.
Like the first one came out in 1968, and the last one came out in 1974, and that was it.
Yeah.
Right, in 1974, there was also the Apes TV show, and then radio silence pretty much until the late 90s.
You think they had too much ape in the 70s?
I think they had too much ape and not enough budget. I think we'll get into that through the episodes, but
overdose.
They overdosed on the apes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is something we're going to talk about as we go through these movies, the narrative of their like production and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think it's a very fascinating little pocket of like cinema history this like period of time where the Planet of the Apes were like these popular science fiction genre movies that were like simultaneously like starting something that would be passed off and picked up by the likes of like Star Wars.
And there's so much TLC that went into to every aspect of these films.
Right.
The production value, the story, the timeline itself. Even though the directors vary, the timeline is still cohesive, and it's still so iconic, regardless.
Right, and it's also way more complicated and insane than than you would think a Planet of the Apes sequel would be. Which, from the outside, I mean, these movies, they're batshit crazy, but we're gonna sink our little teeth into them. We're gonna chew on them. We're gonna be like,
What aspects of the films did you think about most as you were taking notes for this? By the way, side note, Dan and I, we are a couple, and we talk about every single film that we see.
Right.
However, in preparation for this podcast, we were not allowed to talk about any of these films, and that has been a cruel and unusual punishment.
Yeah, it's been quite difficult to go. So I guess a little bit of pretense here. Maybe we won't bring this up on any of the later episodes, maybe. But if you're listening to the 0 episode, you're getting the hot scoop. You're getting the secret insights, the behind the scenes on Talk of the Planet of the Apes. And that's, we're recording all of these episodes at the same time.
Yeah.
We're recording episode 0 all the way to episode 5 in one, like, shotgun recording. And because of that, we had to spend the last 2 weeks watching all of the movies in preparation and taking our notes separately so that we can reconvene and just, have stuff to talk about and not completely like blow our loads before the microphone is rolling.
Yeah, exactly. So as far as the aspects as to what I was focusing on, I would definitely say I'm a huge timeline nerd. So like anything to do with like, I love Doctor Who so much. Doctor Who since I was in middle school. So yeah, any aspect of like time exploration where it's not necessarily linear, where it's more like a bowl of spaghetti. I'm obsessed with those kinds of theories and stuff. And Planet of the Apes thoroughly explores to the point where it's even in their lore. It's even in the myths and the written laws of the simian people.
Right.
So I think that's so fascinating.
I like everything ape related. I like movies where they have something to say. I like to sink even if it could be something super simple or whatever. But like if the movie is just like wearing it so boldly on its sleeve, I have nothing but like admiration for that sometimes, if it's done properly and if it's done in like a fun manner, of course. I also like to get into the pedanticness of these timelines, even though I know in reality they don't matter for it to be a good movie, but they matter to have fun talking about it. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's
like it doesn't matter that technically none of these movies make sense with one another. But if we sit here and we rack our brains for 30 minutes and we pretend like, and we draw conclusions that the filmmakers were obviously not thinking about at the time to make them make sense with the timeline, that could be fun. I just think there's fun in that because this is such like a goofy franchise, but it is so serious, like self-serious.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like it's so sincere about this aspects of it that are silly, which is why I think it makes for such like a fun conversation piece.
Absolutely. And not to mention the amount of articulate detail that was put into every single aspect of the technical effects as well, and even the production side of it too. The landscapes, the set, there is just such a primal human touch to every artistic aspect of these films. And it never loses its touch. It never does.
Well, it's also because it's so like on the cutting edge of this type of makeup and this type of special effects. There weren't that many movies that went as far as these movies did.
Right.
Especially like we'll get into it when we're talking about the first film, especially, but like John Chambers, the guy who was heading the special effects makeup in these movies, he was effectively like the inventor of special effects makeup.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't like makeup for movies wasn't like thought about, like special effects makeup or like gore or stuff like that, until like the war came around, and there was men who would make prosthetics for veterans who had been disfigured or some way.
Right.
So those actors used to just do the makeup on themselves. They'd be like, oh, this would be cool. And like they would just do some special effects shit on themselves. And John Chambers in particular was, he was a medic, like one of those war veteran fixer-uppers who would make prosthetics.
So he has firsthand experiencing as to what is realistically like the kind of damage that would be caused. And
it was just applying that expertise in that medical field into something like more fantastical.
Yeah.
And it paved the way for like what we know today as fantasy and sci-fi and stuff like that. Like imagine Lord of the Rings movies without all these practical special effects, like built up orcs or elves or stuff like that. Like this whole field of filmmaking that is so crucial and important. Winter would know firsthand about that kind of stuff. That's her kind of expertise.
I just like to do the scary stuff, the cuts and whatnot.
Yeah, she's gonna be very modest, but she's like an incredible special effects artist in her own right, and especially in the practical like special effects makeup field. So there's a lot of fun, ooey gooey special effects in these movies, and some of them are very, 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 very cheaply, very poorly done in the later ones, and it adds to some of the fun, in my opinion.
But it also does harm to the authenticity of the legacy of these first 5 movies as well.
Right.
Like how much detail and how much like gall was put into absolutely making every little aspect of it correct and near perfect. Because of course there's going to be imperfections, but even in those purposeful imperfections as well, I feel like, and I'm not going to get into we're only in patient 0. I'm not going to get into the last 5 movies.
Right.
But it does feel like it starts to lose its human touch as it goes on, and that's so unfortunate. That technology can sometimes get in the way of that.
We're not talking about those movies in this miniseries in particular, but my whole take on those movies is that those are the revolutionary films for special effects today that these were in the past. That like the visual effects and the technology used to bring the apes to life in the modern Planet of the Apes movies makes the apes more human than they ever could have been, because they are performance capture. They are humans. They're literally humans acting. And because there's such like a visionary director behind those last 2 in particular, Matt Reeves, the name of the director of Rise of the Planet of the Apes is escaping me. It adds such a level of authenticity because he filmed those movies in a way as if there were not CG characters there, as if there were just people there. And he lit them in a way where you would light an actual actor. And because of that, you get these little things that special effects makeup makes it feel more tactile in those old movies because they don't have the technology. But in the new movies, we still don't have like even in the Kong movies, Kong doesn't look as good as Caesar looks in the new Planet of the Apes movies. It's so uncanny how realistic and how textured and how like he feels like a real guy. Like I feel like I could talk to Caesar in the new Planet of the Apes movies.
Yeah, but on that same coin, different side, I would argue that the whole point of the simian lore and the simian laws is they are not humans. They are their own entity. And the whole aspect of humans being basically their slaveholders and how they are declaring this independence, it's almost ironic that accidentally and subconsciously there is this melded blurred boundary,
right?
Where now in the newer films, the simians look more human-like,
right?
And even though if Caesar from the first couple movies found out about that, I'm sure he'd be pissed.
Well, I think it's obviously an intentional decision to make the apes in these old movies not really look like apes.
Right.
Like they look kind of like human apes.
They're revolutionized apes.
They're evolved kind of apes. But in the new ones, in the beginning, at least in Rise of the Planet of the Apes, they look like regular ass apes.
Mm-hmm.
And then as the movie's gone on, they made the artistic decision to slowly give them more human qualities. But they still look more like apes and more like real apes in the new movies than they did at any point in the old movies. And I think that's because audiences have also changed. Perspectives have changed. The tone has changed so much. And we'll get into that when we talk about these movies, the tones. But
also, just as a side note, are they supposed to look like closer to apes? Because they're basically their own species. They're their own entity because they've gone through so many levels of evolution that wasn't believed to be feasibly possible. So they still have those primal instincts and that primal execution in the way that they carry out their daily situations, but their brains are more evolved. Therefore, isn't there this weird in between where they're their own species?
Yeah, like technically, it's fascinating. I know we're spending a lot of time on this episode, but I think it's interesting to talk about this because it's none of the apes at any point. And I know in the old movies it wasn't intentional. Like in some of the old, like in Conquest or in Escape from the Planet of the Apes, they're supposed to look like real apes, but they obviously don't because of the limitations. Mm-hmm. But in the newer ones, because those limitations aren't there, it's more intentional. Like the artistic choice to make them look like real apes at first, and even just look like real apes in general, is because that is maybe like the vision that the original ones were trying to go for but couldn't at the time.
But is it?
Not the first one. We're gonna not get into the vision of these movies until we get to the episodes about them. But and also, I mean, we're leaving the door open. We're only gonna maybe we'll only mention that here in this episode 0.
Here's a little taste as to how our debates will go.
I think that we can do like a second season of this podcast once we wrap up these 5 episodes of the Millennium Era.
Yes.
We're calling it the Millennium Era of Planet of the Apes movies because we're recording this maybe a month out from when the new one is coming out, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, which is going to be the 5th Planet of the Apes movie released since the year 2000.
Oh my God.
Which means there has been equal amount of Planet of the Apes released in the last 25 years as there were in the 6 years the original series ran from, which would make it for a perfect season 2. And I think, and I also have the 2 television shows, Planet of the Apes and Return of the Planet of the Apes. I got like sets of them because I just wanted to watch them. They looked interesting. And maybe we'll even cover that down the line if we decide to return back to this miniseries. But for now, just to set the expectations like appropriately to like what we're up to, we're just going to be talking about the film Planet of the Apes from 1968, Beneath the Planet of the Apes from 1970, Escape from the Planet of the Apes from 1971, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes from 1972, and Battle for the Planet of the Apes from 1973. We're not going to get into Planet of the Apes 1974, but I know in my heart I will watch that. We just didn't have time this time around.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't part of the podcast. I didn't ask Winter to read this, but I also have here in my hand a paperback of Planet of the Apes by Pierre Boulle, the old paperback book that the original movie was based on. And I took it's a very short book, and the audiobook on Audible is free, if you remember. So I just listened to it, and I flipped through the pages, and I thought it was quite a fun little romp. So I told Winter, I opened the floor to her saying, hey, if you have any questions about the book or anything like that, we could talk about it in the episode 0 on like the prologue episode, just to see if just to get our whole kind of our bases set. This is going to be a shorter episode anyway. And I don't want to go too far into the subject matter of the first movie. So I'm going to keep it kind of vague when we're talking about the book at first. But I thought I was going to get a little bit more out of reading the book. But a lot of what I got out of the book is stuff that's kind of already in the movie, if that makes sense. Do you have any questions about it? Or
how do they lay the foundation of the world?
Right. So, well, for those of you at home that don't know, Pierre Boulle, French author, right? This book was called La Planète des Singes, also known as Monkey Planet.
Nice.
Which the apes would not like being called Monkey
Absolutely
Planet.
Not. No.
Essentially, in the original book, there's these two astronauts that find a message in a bottle floating in space, and they take it in and they read it. And they're reading the account of an astronaut who crashed on a monkey planet and like what happened to him. Key differences here is that obviously the characters have really stupid names like Ulysse Mero or like, you know, other French things. They're going to a planet off of the star of Betelgeuse, which is like the namesake of Beetlejuice. Which I think is maybe what the original mission is in the movie too. Like their trajectory is that they're going towards the star Betelgeuse. But in this book, they actually land on a planet orbiting Betelgeuse. And they're all French people and they're journalists and astronauts. Kind of the same shit happens to his fellow astronauts, like getting lobotomized and killed and stuff. And Cornelius and Zira are still in it. Like they're still called that and they still play the same roles. The biggest difference though is that it takes place in like an ape version of New York City. Oh, okay. So
it's more dystopian.
It's more like satirical. It's like lampooning the idea of like our society is run by monkeys.
So it's more of like a parallel to human society, not an ape's society, like not a simian society.
It's the same metaphor kind of the original one, like lampooning the governments and stuff of the time and like the way society is. But instead of it being more of like a medieval kind of thing, it's like a sci-fi kind of thing. Like it's in a big city. It's ape city.
Less primal?
I mean, they're still just acting like people. It's like, oh, well, might as well be humans, am I right? Because they're just being monkeys. Like they're being silly, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Like it's a lot more of that type of energy. And certain things that were cut out of the movie are in here. Like, for example, Ulysse, whatever the French name is for that. Ulysse. I mean, it's the French name for like Odysseus, right? Odyssey.
Oh, okay.
He has a son with Nova, so that's upsetting to think about. This Cornelius and Zira are these like chimpanzee doctors who help him escape and stuff. And when they help Nova and him escape. I don't even know how to pronounce his name. French people, man. I like dunking on the French. It's funny.
Oh my God.
They help them escape, and the key difference is that they get back on the ship and fly to Earth or something. But because of that, they see. Let me see. Yeah, they rendezvous with an orbiting ship, and when they get to Earth, they notice like, oh, Paris looks the same. But then they realize that a gorilla is driving a car. What the freaking heck? Now the Earth is also the planet of the apes?
That's fascinating because they almost, in the original story, there's less of a hatred for the human society structure. It's for the fact that they just adopted it. Like in the films, at least from what we've seen, I won't get too deep into it, they absolutely despised anything to do with the ways of humans and the human culture and society. Right. So it's fascinating to see that they almost just adopted the city and took it over.
Yeah, it's so the iconic twist, if you don't know it about the original movie, what are you doing listening to a podcast about Planet of the Apes? But the whole thing is that the Planet of the Apes was Earth all along. Right. In the book, the Planet of the Apes was not Earth all along. It was actually another planet. So that's like one of the biggest differences is that it was another planet. And when he comes back to Earth, Earth is becoming like the Planet of the Apes.
Right.
So it's like a satire on like how our world is being run by animals. It's a lot more like silly, like outwardly silly, because it is a satire. And those astronauts at the beginning of the story who find the message in the bottle floating through space, it's revealed in the last chapter that they throw the message back out to space thinking it's ridiculous because the idea of a human piloting a spaceship doesn't make any sense.
Meanwhile,
plot
finding
twist.
a message in a bottle in space
Right.
is also
Well, the plot
ridiculous.
twist is that the astronauts from the opening scene of the book were apes the whole time reading
Right.
the message.
Oh,
Because
okay.
it's like humans are gone, they're animals, and the apes are now in charge. So that's like the big twist of the book. The big twist of the book is that the astronauts were apes the whole time.
Wow.
But so
Fascinating.
it's a fun read. It's a fun book, and it's a nice little paperback. It fits in your pocket, and it has that Scholastic Book Fair smell, as Winter said.
Yes, it does.
But I on the drive here to the studio, our very advanced little studio here in a closet that we set up because the studio that we're gonna rent out is being occupied.
Yeah.
I passed her the book to like have some light reading on the drive over, and she just kind of smelled it the whole time, like the smell of
Why
like
are you calling me out right now?
it's an old book, and she's
Stop
just like,
exposing me.
yes, I like smelling this.
Whatever. Why does it sound like Borat?
I don't know.
What was that?
Pierre Boulle is also the author of Bridge Over the River Kwai. So if anyone at home is listening, you probably have heard of the Bridge Over the River Kwai. It's like an old World War II book, World War II movie. He wrote it after coming home from the war, I guess.
Oh, okay.
So that's his whole thing. He wrote a very serious movie about like POWs and stuff like that in the army in World War II.
So that's another connection then in the Planet of the Apes franchise and production that has a connection to war.
Right.
Like people who have actually experienced war.
Right. And a lot of these movies are about war. And we're gonna get into that very soon, but very interesting. Very interesting. And Pierre Boulle was on the record at first of not liking the direction of the first movie when they were adapting his book because they were changing what he felt was like one of the key aspects of it, like the setting of it. But after the movie came out, he came around and he was quoted saying that like he understood why they changed what they needed to change. And then as a movie, it worked better because of it.
Right.
Which is like incredibly based. Like author actually somewhat appreciating his work.
Yeah, because literarily speaking and cinematically speaking are two very different things.
Exactly. And often authors don't understand why things need to be changed for a movie. And it's because they're not thinking cinematically, I guess, because they're thinking literarily. Case in point, someone like J.K. Rowling has written many books, made a lot of money writing books, maybe not the brightest human being on the earth, but she decided to write her own screenplays and made a couple of absolutely terrible movies.
I don't know. I'm not well versed in the world of Hogwarts.
Yeah, it's for the best. For the best. You take that as a blessing, and you don't go further into the world of Hogwarts.
Got it.
But yeah, we're gonna keep this as like a short episode, like a little half-hour long episode, a little intro prologue, and I hope you guys enjoy the tone and the vibes. We're gonna be getting a lot more heated and a lot more in depth and a lot more. I can't think of any metaphors that ties into like a monkey, like any similes that are like
All's fair in love and war.
Yeah, there's nothing monkey about that. You just said some random
but
bullshit.
It's about war. I was like, what can I say about war?
Yeah. Well, how do we end this? How do we end these episodes?
Well, get comfy, get a snack, get your coffee,
sit back,
and we'll see you in the next episode.
Yeah, if you want any more of me and Winter and I, you can follow us on Instagram.
Yeah.
I'm at DCR Films. That's like my main like film-based Instagram. And Winter,
I'm at Cinematic Witchcraft.
She's Cinematic Witchcraft. Now stay tuned, subscribe, leave a 5-star review on your podcatcher of choice, and recommend a podcast to a friend. I'm sure there are other people out there that want to listen to bumbling people rant and rave about Planet of the Apes movies while just figuring it out as they're going along, but sounds like a fun time to me.
Don't even recommend it. Just put it on in the car where they can't get out.
Exactly. Don't give them the opportunity
Take
to
them
back away.
hostage.
Yes. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.